Hey, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. This is a 2020 year in review show, a little short thing that I thought I'd whack up for you. Sitting at home, having a couple of beers. It's raining outside. Bit of reflection on a crazy year. I won't focus too much on the whole COVID thing, although, can't avoid it. But anyway, this year, for the Gig Life Podcast, 37 episodes, 3,611 minutes, which is 60 hours or 60.18 hours of content out there. The podcast was ranked 19th most popular podcast on Spotify for 2020 and ranked number 10 on the Apple Podcast Music Interviews. So that was pretty cool to hear that stuff or to read that stuff. It's been heard in 32 different countries currently, and it's 100% independent, self-produced by myself. So I just thought I'd share some of those little stats for you. Oh, and the other thing, the listenership has grown by about 115% since this time last year. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody out there that tunes in and subscribes and listens. Like I've always said, couldn't do it without you. Now, I thought I'd go through some high points of the year, some low points of the year, how I sort of dealt with the COVID thing, how the podcast dealt with the COVID thing. If you just let me ramble for a few minutes and just, get the stuff out. So, I might just start this part of it by talking to you about something that was probably one of the most difficult things to get my head around this year. And back in 2019, episode number 34, I interviewed Natasha Stewart. Now, tragically, Natasha lost her battle with cancer in January this year. So just the impact that young woman had on so many people's lives was just immense. I feel honoured to have met her, to have chatted with her on this podcast, and in doing that, I think we've added to her legacy. So I thought it extremely important to mention her today. Let's flip that around a bit now. I want to share with you one of the funniest moments for me this year. Now, obviously, there's the sitting down and doing the recording of the interviews and talking to the guests, and before that, there's the research and that kind of stuff. But then afterwards, I have to sit down and go through and listen and edit. And in episode 87, I interviewed Phil Sobrano. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode, you should go back and listen to it because it was very good. It was done, during COVID, and it was a Zoom type thing. And I just want to share with you something that happened during that podcast interview that I wasn't aware of until I sat down and started editing. So just listen to this.
And they're a one in a million. They're really a one in a million. But there are some of those guys out there.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Gee.
Do you mind if I just go to the toilet for once?
Mate, go to the toilet, dude.
Come on, mate. Come on. Don't hold me back. Don't hold me back. No.
Are you going to stay? Leave it recording.
Yeah, leave it recording. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, sweet. Be back in a sec.
Yeah. So Stevie's just gone off to the toilet, and I thought I'd share a few thoughts with you while he's at the toilet. One of those thoughts is about what it's like to work in the studio when you're on your own, and it's a very closed-in environment. In fact, the key to noise reduction and making a very quiet space is closing out all the air. So it's basically an airlock. The resulting situation when you're working on your own for hours on end, and you're really excited about the project that you're doing, you don't want to walk away, you tend to kind of fart every now and again. And, I think you can imagine what that's going to cause.
We're back.
Yeah, we're back.
We were talking earlier today about your fascination with success in the show business. So you can imagine when I went back and edited that and I heard it, I was just in tears. It was great. Now, we'll just talk about COVID for a little bit, and I'll tell you sort of what I was up to when COVID sort of came about, and how I sort of navigated the podcast through that, and my sort of thoughts and feelings. So majority of the interviews that I do, they're face to face. So I'll go out to the person's house, or they'll come here to my studio. Before COVID, there was a few of the New Zealand guests that I'd talked to that had to do via Zoom, that kind of thing. So to me, sitting in a room with someone, obviously it's far more personal, and it's easier to get people to relax, when they're sitting right in front of you. So the very last one-on-one, face-to-face interview I did before COVID was Darryl Beaton, and that was episode 76. And just before that episode came out and I'd done the editing, COVID hit. And while talking to Darryl, Darryl was such a positive dude, and he was talking about his new music that he was going to release, and things that he had coming up in the future. And all of a sudden there was almost like no sort of gig future. People were losing their gigs and all that kind of thing. So I really questioned, should I keep releasing these episodes? So I released Darryl's, and then I had some others sort of booked, and the next one after that was Darren Ferrugia, and Darren was supposed to be coming to Sydney for a gig, but it got cancelled for some reason. I don't think it was because of COVID, so we carried on with that. The next one after that was Emma Pasque, and we had organised to meet up in Bondi, and that was the first one that we had to cancel the face-to-face thing because of lockdown. So, the world just started getting really sort of weird, But went through with that, talked to Emma, and then I had that realisation that this is the kind of the new normal for now. I thought just for now, the whole Zoom type thing. So went out, bought a new webcam, and tried to tidy my studio so when you're looking through the camera, it looked nice and tidy at the back and all that sort of stuff. So I thought that would be a good time to start contacting some people down in Melbourne, because that's a group of musicians that have been on my radar for a long time. So I obviously thought, people are in lockdown, a little bit easier to access. So I went about doing that and booked some fantastic interviews with some of the Melbourne Cats down there. But what started to happen, and I'll be brutally honest, the weight of it all was starting to take its toll on me, and I had a little bit of a mini breakdown, which I've talked about before on the podcast. Got through that, but also what started to happen is the listeners started to drop off, and I even considered stopping the podcast. I thought maybe it was the name, the Gig Life Podcast, and there weren't any gigs anymore, and I know that a lot of the audience listened to the podcast on the way to gigs or on the way home from gigs. I mean, that's what I used to do. And also there was the advent of, the Facebook Live type shows that appeared, as well as new podcasts by artists and musicians that weren't gigging. So also, I had guests that I had booked. They cancelled as they felt that they didn't really have a gig life anymore, so to speak. So, and they didn't want to talk about their past as they didn't know if they were really going to have a future in music. So it was heartbreaking to hear them hurting. So, I did seriously question this podcast's place and all that, but I decided to keep going, and I'm so glad I did, because you all came back, man, and as well as a whole bunch of new listeners. So that's cool, man. A couple of highlights for me this year have been the Spotlight series episodes. Episode 97, we did the Steve Gadd Spotlight. Myself, Gordon Rittmeister, Hamish Stewart in my studio here, and then my old drum teacher, Lance Phillip from Wellington in New Zealand on the Zoom, and also Darren Ferrugia, and he was in Melbourne on the Zoom. And we just talked about Steve Gadd for a couple of hours. It was just great. And then, not long after that, that release, Steve Hunter, legendary Sydney bass player, contacted me and said, I just listened to the Steve Gadd thing. It was fantastic. Why don't you do a Jaco Pastorius spotlight? And I said, that sounds cool. So we did it. And it just so happened that episode, the Jaco Pastorius spotlight, ended up being episode 100. And, obviously 100 episodes, that was one of my goals. And it was really cool to do that, because we actually got to use the first level of Lazy Bones in Marrickville in Sydney, and that was cool. It was just us, and yeah, we just talked about Jaco Pastorius for a couple of hours. It was really, really cool. Obviously, talking to all these great musicians and artists throughout the year, I get to hear a lot of new music. Now, I just have a few that I want to mention that probably have had the biggest impact, via the podcast. So, one album, Honest Oblivion by Scordatura, and that's Tim Firth's band. I just love that album. Space to Breathe by Casey Burgess, that's fantastic. LAB4. I interviewed Ada Adams Tamatea this year, and in 2019 I got to interview Brad Cora and Joel Shadbolt from LAB, so it was cool to, hear that album. And also the other one was Rhythmized by Barry Leaf. Now that's just fantastic. That's produced by Kerry Buchanan. Obviously Barry, Mick Skelton playing drums, Dario Bortolin playing bass guitar, Bill Risby keyboards, Pete Northcote playing guitar, Tony Azzopardi playing percussion. Just fantastic album. Just that, to me, I think that one in particular was the one I probably listened to the most. So really cool. Now, I also wanted to mention some people that have helped me this year, particularly with research, or who have been there for me to call up and say, hey, what can you tell me about this person? Or they would call me and say, why don't you talk to this person? And those two guys were Gordon Rittmeister and Hamish Stewart. They introduced me to a whole bunch of musicians this year that have become my friends and that I've got to talk to. So thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated. Now, lastly, before I wrap it up, 2021, I will be continuing my partnership with Take One Eastside FM. It's a show on Friday afternoons between 3 and 4 p.m. and the Gig Life podcast has a segment about 10 to 15 minutes every Friday, and it's like a shortened version of selected episodes of the Gig Life podcast. Links to Take One FM in the show notes of this podcast. Alrighty, that's it from me for 2020. If you dig the show and you listen on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. The Gig Life podcast is free, always has been, always will be, but if you see value in the show, you can donate. Go to thegiglifepodcast.com or to the link in the show notes. Give as little or as much as you like, but whatever you give, just know that it goes back into creating the great content for this show. So, again, that's it from me. Stay safe, and I'll catch you in 2021. Cheers.